Hello, thank you for attending today's educational session hosted by Michelle Strong. Michelle is a registered nutritionist with a passion for supporting those on their path to better health and wellness. Michelle brings a wealth of knowledge in evidence-based nutrition with a special focus on fertility, hormonal balance, and overall well-being. Whether navigating fertility challenges or simply aiming to improve daily habits, Michelle's insights are grounded in compassion, clarity, and science. And today she's our host, and she will be presenting on the topic of how to prep naturally for IVF. So following the presentation, there will be the opportunity for questions, and you're welcome to unmute your mic or just type in your questions in the chat. And I will now hand it off to Michelle.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. It's nice to be here again. I am just going to navigate quickly to my presentation, and then I will share my screen. I really love this topic because it's close to my heart. I will tell you a little bit about that as we go along, but in just getting started, I understand that IVF, like fertility challenges on their own, are heartbreaking and frustrating, and they're gut-wrenching. I get all that stuff. I've been through the process myself. And then now, if you're embarking upon an IVF cycle, there's a lot of considerations involved in this as well. There's a huge emotional toll that has probably gone into getting to this point, and then will be as you go through the journey itself. The money, the energy, all of it. It's very, very consuming. And so I understand this. And so I'm speaking to you from a place of compassion, but also like there is so much that we can do. And so let's take those steps to ensure as best we can from home that we have as good of an outcome as possible. So currently today, I have a busy practice working with couples to help them optimize their bodies for whether that be spontaneous conception or through treatment cycles. So I work with both couples. I have 2 kids that were conceived spontaneously, but that was after many years of fertility struggles, IUIs, an IVF cycle that went horribly wrong, and unfortunately ended up in an ectopic pregnancy. But I have a lot of clients who have amazing journeys through IVF cycles and have babies from it. So everyone's journey is so different. And so what we want to make sure is that we do as much as we can on our own, like I said, from home, to optimize the success of your cycle that would be coming up. So everything that we talk about is going to be backed by science and by evidence. And so I really want to get in and talk about 3 different ways that we can optimize, your body for this next phase. So most obvious, and it's most obvious, but it's also the one I get the most questions about. And it's very unique for each person, I should say that. But there are some foundational concepts that we can really start with and make sure that we are optimizing to put us ahead of the game. So there is a lot of information out there in terms of what we can do to impact our chance, and nutrition is one of them. So you've probably heard of the Nurse's Health Study, which is a huge study. I've linked as many research articles as I could here, but basically found that women who followed a fertility diet had a 66% lower risk of ovulatory infertility and 27% lower risk of infertility. So we know that nutrition plays a big role. So specific to the Nurse's Health Study, this fertility diet is characterized by a lower intake of trans fats and obviously processed foods. That's a given. More monosaturated fats like olive oil, avocados, nuts, and seeds. A lower intake of animal proteins, but not reducing protein in general. It's really important, but also focusing on plant-based proteins such as things like lentils and hemp seeds and those clean options. Really focusing on high fiber foods like beans, quinoa, yams, vegetables, raw and cooked vegetables. The fiber piece is really important here. And then lower glycemic carbohydrates, which tend to be the more fibrous ones. So again, lentils, berries, whole grains, high fat dairy versus low fat. Like if you consume dairy, not everyone can. Make sure that you're buying like at least a 2%, like whether that be plain yogurt or cottage cheese. Like don't go for a 0%. We want the fat in there. It is very, very important. There's lots of great research showing us the connection between omega-3 fatty acids and just good fat in general, and good health and fertility outcomes. So it's really important. In this case, a multivitamin use or prenatal, and then higher plant-based iron intake. So this would be things like spinach. So, we know what I'm trying to basically show you is that we know that nutrition plays a role. And so I'm not like, a lot of people do buy into this already, but if you haven't yet and you haven't started making changes, I mean, if at the very least focus on the Nurses Health Study, and this is a great way to kind of get your feet wet. So, on top of that, there's a couple other concepts that we can look at in the realm of nutrition that can have a really big impact. So for me, this comes down to balancing out your insulin and balancing out or reducing your inflammation. So first we need to know where we're starting from. So with all of my clients, I always check their blood sugar and their insulin level so I can understand from a metabolic perspective what's going on. This can have a profound impact on your body, especially with women with PCOS, which is very common within the fertility space, that we have a lot of PCOS women, and they tend to have, high levels of insulin. We know this can cause inflammation, which can impact egg quality and implantation. This can impact other hormones, like it's vast. And so having healthy insulin levels that are within range is really important. So obviously at very first, we want to look at reducing the foods that may cause a spike in blood sugar and insulin. This would be your processed foods or your white breads, your white flours, white sugars, things like that. These are foods that they don't serve us at all. There's no nutritional value here. And so we really want to reduce these and or ideally eliminate them, because they would be causing an increase in our blood sugar and our insulin levels. Fiber is really important because when you consume any type of carbohydrate, which is a sugar, fiber comes in and it sort of reduces the impact of the sugar on your body. And so when you're thinking about foods, you want to think about like, how is this food going to serve me? And in terms of managing blood sugar and insulin, fiber helps just to slow the response of the sugar on your body. And that's really, really helpful. So examples of foods that are rich in fiber would be, vegetables, fibrous foods. So like a seed bread versus like a non-seeded bread. Beans are a good example of fiber. Even things like psyllium fiber, which some people add to water just to kind of increase fiber. It's not a food per se, but it's one way to get more fiber in your diet. Increasing protein and fat is another way to slow the response of sugar or carbohydrates on your body. And so protein, like for many women, we want to sort of be aiming for, about 100 grams of protein. That's an easy way to sort of like kind of get you to focus on protein without being too complicated about it. So if you are, obviously this is going to be dependent on lots of different factors, including how active you are, but if you can kind of be aiming for 85 to 100 grams of protein, you'll be doing much better than probably what you are. I've been doing this for almost 20 years and I very rarely meet anyone who's getting enough protein. And this is so great for balancing blood sugar and insulin. And same with fat, like your avocados and olive oil, your nuts and seeds. These are highly supportive of like so many things related to fertility, but that in fact, it also supports hormone balancing. Also, food spacing. So, a lot of people are eating and grazing all day long, and this actually is not that great for balancing out blood sugar and insulin. We really want to give our body the nutrition it needs and then some time for your body to digest it, for hormones to sort of do their thing and come back into balance, and then have another meal. If you're constantly eating, you're constantly producing blood sugar and insulin all the time. And often what will happen is we'll see higher levels of insulin because of that. And so we want to just kind of have main meals, maybe a snack partway through if we need to, but enough at those main meals to avoid having to eat too frequently through the day. And certainly not, you want to kind of aim to stop eating 3 hours or more before bed, because we're not able to break down our foods as well as the day goes on. And then lastly, just making sure you have muscle. So this comes with having enough protein and moving our body. Muscle and moving our body helps to regulate our metabolic parameters like blood sugar and insulin, which is an important part of it. So balancing insulin is one big piece from a nutrition standpoint that I like to focus on, and then also reducing inflammation. So colorful fruits and vegetables are great. Removing foods that may be irritating to you. So if you have any food sensitivities that you're aware of, pulling those out and not eating them could be a great way. I mean, this conversation is one that I'll spend many, many hours with someone just talking through. So this is the quick snapshot of how to reduce inflammation, but we really want to understand where the inflammatory pieces are coming from. This could be infections, it could be injuries, it could be stress, who knows? But from a nutrition standpoint, lots of colorful fruit and vegetables, elimination of any sensitivities you may have, green tea, turmeric, spices like ginger, cinnamon. These are all great ways to support reducing inflammation in the body. And so again, nutrition does play a massive role, but for sake of this conversation, I will move on to one more way in which we can, oh, sorry, no, I wanted to show you this one document first. So if you're looking to create a perfect meal, so some people, again, I spend a lot of time doing this privately with people, based on the individual's needs. But, if we're looking for a conversation like this to build a perfect meal, think about it from the perspective of, you're going to always want to choose one from each of these categories for each of your meals. So, protein. Again, if you're looking at eating 3 to 4 times a day, each serving, if you're eating 4 times, is going to be about 20 to 25 grams of protein. So to give you an example, 4 eggs is 24 grams of protein. So you'd have to eat 4 eggs in one serving to get a quarter of your protein for the day. But you're going to be basically picking one serving of protein about the size of your palm. You're going to pick lots of colorful vegetables that are rich in antioxidants, which have been correlated with higher pregnancy and live birth rates, and you can have an unlimited amount of these. We want to make sure we're choosing smart carbohydrates, which are fiber rich essentially, and that would be about a half a cup or a fist size, and always including some type of fat to help support that blood sugar and insulin balance, as well as lower inflammation, support fertility, and all those good processes that are impacted by fats. So that's how you build the meal if you were looking at really supporting your fertility. Okay, so then on to saber-toothed tigers. And so this conversation is really close to my heart because I feel like this is one that really impacted me through my fertility journey. So saber-toothed tigers are another way that I call stress. So, when we talk about stress, we look at sort of evolutionary cavemen were stressed out by things like saber-toothed tigers or famine, not having enough water, all those kind of things. These are the kind of things that stress them out. Today, our stressors come from different things like, driving 2 hours in traffic or a demanding job or whatever that may be, fertility challenges. And so we have to learn to understand, where those stresses are coming from and address them. But I find after doing this for 19 years at this point, so many people don't even know that they're stressed. And so, and I think we also discount the impact that stress can have on our body and therefore our hormones and our ability to digest and absorb nutrients. It's far reaching. And so there's lots of different ways we can identify if we're stressed or not. And there's no perfect way. And it's we're looking at symptoms, we're looking at potentially blood work. Like, there's so many different ways to look at it. So it's not just like, oh, if you measure your HSCRP and it's high, you're stressed. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we have to look at things within like context and bigger picture, but here are some thoughts to consider. So blood biomarkers, HSCRP is a measurement of inflammation. Glucose and insulin just mentioned, these are, if these are high, we often see that correlated, at least in my practice, with people who are more stressed, because these things can rise if stress is present. We can actually measure your cortisol levels, and we can also measure cholesterol, which I also can, see if it's high, can be related to inflammation, can be related to high glucose and insulin. Like, it's all connected. There's also another one. It's a digestive enzyme called amylase. And this study showed that levels of amylase were shown to be correlated to the time it took a woman to become pregnant. So women within the highest quartile of amylase level at baseline were twice as likely to subsequently experience infertility. So again, there's lots of different ways we can measure this, but I find that, so I'm just going to admit somebody who's trying to get in. I find that, there's, many people that don't even recognize they're stressed, and that's okay, because I think what ends up happening is that we live in this sort of low grade or high level of stress, and it just becomes our normal. We don't even recognize what stress feels like anymore. And then it almost takes something really intense or really catastrophic to make us realize how stressed we are. But in reality, a lot of us kind of live in this kind of chronic stress place all the time. And so, these are some of the ways that we can look at how that would be affecting things. Other ways to look at that would be, asking yourself these questions. Do you have issues like sleeping, whether it's too much or too little, or you waking up through the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep, or you're exhausted in the morning when you wake up? Are you eating way more or way less? Like, are you experiencing a lot of GI upset? For me, when I get stressed, my GI is the first to go. Like, it is the one that's to tell me, like, things are not good for you, pay attention. So I think that these are like little white flags that are just saying, like, pay attention to me. Like, I need a little bit more TLC. So again, like, lots of different ways to look at that. Or if you wear an Oura ring like I do, or an Apple Watch, sometimes these will measure something called your HRV, your heart rate variability. And so it's not great research, but there is some, people that will say that if your HRV is under 50, that can represent some stress. Your heart rate variability is like the beats between your heart, the time between your heartbeats. And so if it's lower, there are people some say that that's related to stress as well. And, it's funny because I can see my HRV go up when I am in a calmer state. So for myself, I do see the connection there. So there's lots of different ways to address stress. And I mean, you've all heard of some of them, and I don't want to talk about the same stuff. Like, try to, find the glass half full situation. Like, I don't want to talk about the stuff that you've heard before, but I thought I could bring forward some ideas that maybe you hadn't heard before. So one of them is the binaural beats. So basically, these are sounds and vibrations that stimulate the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that innervates our entire body, and it's connected to the parasympathetic system, which is your rest and digest nervous system. So if we can tone that vagus nerve, we can in fact stimulate a calmer state, essentially. So these frequency and sounds basically stimulate that nerve, helping you get into that kind of calmer state. So if you literally just go onto YouTube and type in binaural beats, there's bazillions of them, and they're really beautiful. And what I will do is I will sit in front of my red light. I'm not saying you need to have a red light, like, that's not part of this. You can if you want to, perfect. But I sit in front of the red light, I put on binaural beats, and I just do some like rhythmic breathing, and it just kind of softens my nervous system, which I really like. There's other exercises that will stimulate your vagus nerve as well, and one of them is called bee breathing, and there is studies on this as well. And essentially what this looks like is rhythmic breathing, but every time you exhale, you hum. And while doing this, you have your hands covering your ears. So it would look something like this. Like you breathe in. And obviously you would continue doing that. And the research study was done for 5 minutes, and the results showed positive correlations with people having lower levels of stress when doing this deep breathing technique. So there's lots of them, right? There's mindfulness, there's breathing techniques, there's, supplementation. There's so many things you can do for stress, but we do know that stress, at the very, very least, impacts um, our well-being, the decisions we can make. It impacts things like can we do we have enough energy to work out or to make healthy meals? Like just that alone, stress can impact. And so we want to have as low levels as possible. But we can also see that things like insulin and cortisol and cholesterol levels can go up in the presence of stress. And so these are things that can certainly impact, again, our health and well-being and fertility. And then one last kind of concept I wanted to leave you with was microbiome management. And this one is getting a lot more attention, and I find in the last couple of years, which is great, but it really does have a big impact on, again, not just our health and well-being, but fertility. So just to show you some studies. So some studies are showing that the bacteria in the cavity of a woman's uterus can play a role in determining pregnancy outcomes in IVF. Research showing that a deviation of normal lactobacilli-dominated vaginal microflora has been associated with reproductive failure and adverse pregnancy outcomes. So, for a lot of my clients, I'm running different microbiome tests with them. And if we see, in this case, more of like a disruptive bacteria, things like Prevotella and Gardnerella versus the lactobacillus, which is what we want to see there, we can see, poorer outcomes from a standpoint of fertility. Also remember that many of the neurotransmitters are made in our gut. So things like serotonin, dopamine. And so if we do not have these in the amounts we want because there's something happening within the gut microbiome, we will have a dysregulated nervous system, and that can, again, impact things like our hormones and, our ability to take the steps that would, in general, help us to support a better fertility outcomes, like moving our body and cooking healthy meals and things like that. So it is like and we have lots of microbiomes, I should say. Like, it's not just a vaginal microbiome or a GI, we have many of them, and we have to support all of them. But I just wanted to show you the importance of the microbiome. So 2 key things I want you to consider with this specifically is that what goes in is important as what goes out. So what goes in, meaning quality foods, the things that I've already mentioned, like from the nurses study, that's the definition in fertility from of quality food. Of course, like there's nuances to that. Of course, like what may be healthy for one person may not be for another. Example, based on genetics and food sensitivities. Like, there are variations, of course, but in general, like, we know the difference between good food and not good food. Supporting our microbiome, so making sure that we're getting lots of pre and probiotic rich foods. So examples of prebiotic foods are like apple and oats and artichokes, garlic and onions, and then probiotic rich foods like miso and sauerkraut and kimchi. These help our body produce lots of that really good bacteria that we need to support those outcomes that I just mentioned. And then really supporting, proper digestion, like chewing our food properly, which is something that, your grandma told you to do, but seems so elementary and dumb. But here we are talking about the importance of really chewing your food properly so that when it enters your stomach, the stomach has less to do and it can send it through and get all the nutrients out of it. And really supporting that constant repair of the GI system. There's so many women that I meet whose GI systems are in just horrendous shape because of infections or high levels of stress or just poor diet. Like, it depends on the person, of course. And so really, like, providing our body with like nourishing foods, bitter foods like endive or bone broth. Like, again, herbs and spices are so nourishing for the body and for that microbiome, especially the GI. But it's also important. Oh, I see a spelling mistake. It's also important as to what comes out. So like we need to make sure we're having regular bowel movements to make sure that the toxins that we need to get out are coming out. And not just toxins, like our body moves unwanted hormones through our bowel system. And so we need to move those out. So making sure you're having 2 to 3 regular bowel movements a day to move things out that need to come out. Also removing food sensitivities. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I can't tell you the number of clients I've worked with. It's over 50% for sure. When we talk, when we do the deep dive on the nutrition piece, we find a ton of food sensitivities. And it's really important that if you suspect them or you have never even considered them, that you maybe look at that because it can impact a lot of different things, like increasing inflammation in the body, which we already know has an impact on things like implantation. And then poor quality foods. I don't need to say anything more about that. We know that those have to come out. We know that they're not good for us, or no, we know they don't serve us in any way. And so removing them is only going to be supportive of that microbiome. But then one thing that I think a lot of us haven't considered is, the idea of infections. And this is something that I see quite often as well. Again, I would say around the 50% mark is that there's infections present. And this could be like whether you're, going into an IVF cycle or not, if you're trying to conceive, this is important to rule out. And this is not something that, on this presentation I can coach you on. But, I'm just bringing it to your attention that there are a lot of different infections out there that can impact the chance of getting pregnant. One of them is the uriplasma, which you may or may not have heard of. It's a bacteria that is found in the urogenital tract and can be associated with fertility challenges. So each person has their own endometrium, of course. And in that is its own microbiome. Initially, we thought that microbiome was sterile, but it is in fact populated with bacteria. We want good bacteria versus the disruptive bacteria, and uriplasma is one of those disruptive bacterias. But this infection can impair endometrial receptivity, which is implantation, which of course, if you're going into an IVF cycle, whether it be, retrieval now and transfer later, implantation is really important, obviously. Again, in another 2023 study, it was found that there was an increase in rates of chemical pregnancies in IVF cycles when uriplasma was present. So uriplasma is not the only infection that needs to be ruled out. There are other ones, including STIs, which likely your fertility clinic has done, but there is other ones that I don't often see checked, again, that can be related to poor outcomes, especially for those who've been trying to get pregnant for a while and can't. This is something that I think is really important to rule out. So I just bring it to your attention because it is a thing. And I think that a lot of us, me included, didn't know about this when I was going through my journey 8 years ago. So that's, my hope that, with this conversation, you can really kind of pick one of these areas if all 3 of them are sort of new to you, and sort of start to build on that and make some improvements as you get closer to your IVF cycle. And if you've tackled the nutrition and you want to work on the microbiome, perfect. But I just hope that there's something in here that was helpful for you, and a little nugget that you can take away and start to build on, or ask someone to get some testing done to make sure that you are taking every step possible to make sure your IVF cycle is as successful as possible. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you need to connect with me in any way, here's some of the ways you could do that.